What's up, everybody, and welcome to another easy math video. Today, our focus is going to be on an introduction to square roots. Now, before we get started, I do suggest if you don't already have a decent understanding of powers and exponents, to go back and check out our video on powers and exponents because it will help you out tremendously to understand the subject matter that we're going to cover today. All right, let's get into it. All right, what are perfect squares? Okay, let's start there. Okay, so here you see we have some equations, and I'll explain what they mean more in a second if they're a little bit confusing. But let's start off here. I can tell you right now 9 is a perfect square, 16 is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square, and 36 is what we call a perfect square. And I will explain what that means more in a second. So here, once again, using our prior knowledge on powers and exponents, you see here we have 3 to the power of 2, 4 to the power of 2, 5 to the power of 2, and 6 to the power of 2. Anything to the power of 2, another way that we describe them is calling them squared. So instead of saying 3 to the power of 2, you could say 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared, and 6 squared. Now, let's review one more time. What does 3 squared mean? Well, you see here we have our base number, which is 3, which when we're dealing with exponents, we are only going to be multiplying the base number. And then the little number here, which we call the exponent, tells us how many of the base number we're going to multiply together. So here we have an exponent of 2, which means we're going to be multiplying 2 sets of 3 together. 3 times 3, that gives us 9. 4 squared means we have 4 times 4, that equals 16. 5 squared, that means we have 5 times 5, that equals 25. And then 6 squared means that we're going to multiply 6 times 6, and that equals 36. Okay? So once again, all of these numbers are perfect squares. What are perfect squares? Well, perfect squares are numbers that we get by multiplying a number by itself or times itself. So 9 is a perfect square because it is achieved by multiplying 3 times itself. 16 is a perfect square because we get it by multiplying 4 times itself. 25, also a perfect square because we get 25. Did I say 35? If I did, my mistake. I meant 25. We get 25 by multiplying 5 times itself. Okay? And then we get 36 by multiplying 6 times itself. So that's why these numbers are in fact called perfect squares. Perfect squares are only numbers that we get by multiplying whole numbers times themselves. If you have to use a decimal multiplied by itself to get that number, it is not a perfect square. And I'll show you some examples in a moment that'll make that a little clearer. Okay, now that we know a little bit more on what perfect squares are, and we understand how squaring a number or numbers to the power of 2, we understand what those are. Now we can get into understanding what square roots are. Okay, square roots are essentially the opposite of squared numbers. Think of it sort of like what division is to multiplication or what subtraction is to addition. It's basically the reverse. Okay, so let's just let's go through some of these examples and then it'll make a little bit more sense to you. Okay, so we have 3 squared, which means 3 times 3. That gives us 9. Once again, 9 is a perfect square because I have a whole number times itself to get to 9. Okay, now let's figure out what the square root of 9 is. Okay, so this symbol that I've drawn here around my 9, that is a square root symbol. Okay, anytime you see that like over a number, they are asking you what the square root of that number is. And what the square root essentially means is, what they are asking you to find is, what number times itself gives us 9? Well, if you look back over here, we see that 3 times itself gives us 9. Okay, so that means the square root of 9 is 3. Okay, here let's move on. 16. Okay, I'm going to put the square root symbol around it. Okay, what is the square root of 16? Well, they're asking you what number times itself gives us 16. If we look back to how we got to 16, it was 4 times itself, or 4 times 4. So the square root of 16 is in fact 4. Okay, next, okay, we have 5 times 5, or 5 squared. That's 25. Okay, so basically, when we put that square root symbol around it, we are asking, what is the square root of 25? What number times itself gives us 25? I've already had all the answers kind of laid out here for you guys. If you look over to the left, you see it's 5, because 5 times 5 equals 25. Okay, 6 times 6, that gives us 36. Let's go ahead and slap that square root symbol around it now, so we can go ahead and look for the square root of 36. Well, that is 6. Okay, once again, they are asking you what number times itself gives us 36. That's 6. All right. Now, we're going to do a couple more examples. I had this nice, neatly laid out for us, so it's pretty easy to see. Okay. You know what? Let's go ahead and let's find the square root of 81. Okay. So they're asking you what number times itself equals 81. If you have a good understanding of, squared exponents or squared numbers, you might already know what the answer is off the bat. If you know your times tables really well, you might know what the answer is off the bat. But let's say, and I already know the answer, I can tell you that, but let's say you didn't know what the square root of 81 is. Okay, what you could do is sort of like a guess and check, okay, to kind of figure it out. Okay, so the square root of 81, let's go back here. It couldn't be 6. Okay, or sorry, because we know that the square root of 36 is 6. So it's got to be, I'd say it's substantially higher than 36. Okay, let's start with, I don't know. Well, and, I know it's got to be higher than 6. I know that it can't be 10. Okay, because right off the bat, I can tell you 10 squared, I know this off the bat. 10 squared, or 10 times 10, equals 100, okay, which is more than 81. Okay, so I know that the square root of 81 is going to be, it's going to be more than 6, okay, but it's going to be less than 10, okay. So let's try, what about 7? Well, 7 squared, or 7 times 7. Sorry for my drawing skills here, guys. That gives us 49. So that doesn't work. Let's try the next number up. What about 8? 8 squared, which means 8 times 8. That equals 64. So it can't be that number. Okay. Okay. Why don't we try it's got to be the next number over. Let's try 9. 9 squared, 9 times 9, it does equal 81, guys. So you kind of see how you can do sort of a guess and check, okay, to get the answer. All right. You just got to, you could take numbers with your calculator, multiply them by themselves, and see, which number will land on the number that's within the square root symbol. Obviously, calculators do have square root functions as well, but I mean, for your own knowledge, to kind of get a greater understanding of square roots, And the more complicated square roots you get, you are going to want to use that calculator. But when we're dealing with perfect squares like we are today, you don't want to use your calculator because that will give, at least you can get an easier, I mean, a better understanding of how square roots work. Now, let's go back to this for a second before I leave you guys off and let you guys go ahead and give this a try. Um, you know, like I said before, 9's a perfect square, 16's a perfect square, 25's a perfect square, 36 is a perfect square. Okay? And once again, why is that? Well, because a whole number times itself gives us these numbers. Like 3 times 3 gives us 9, 4 times 4 gives us 16, 5 times 5 gives us... Okay, sure. But what if somebody asked you to find a square root that was between two perfect squares? Let's say we looked for a number between 9 and 16. I'll just use 12 as an example. Okay? You could definitely find the square root of 12, but what the thing is, when you're using numbers that aren't perfect squares, your answer is not going to be a whole number. You are going to end up with an answer that is between 3 and 4. Okay, so it's going to be a decimal between 3 and 4. If I asked you to find a number, or the square root of a number between 16 and 25, well, your answer is going to be a decimal between 4 and 5. It's going to be 4 point something. Okay, I hope that sort of makes sense. Okay, so when you're dealing with numbers that aren't perfect squares, you are likely going to want to use your calculator, or it's going to be very challenging to find that number. Not to say that it can't be done, but yeah, anyways, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this intro to square roots. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you understood everything here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you like our video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to our page. Give us a shot, guys. Hope it works out well for you. Yeah, guys, give it a shot. See ya.